It was good what we did yesterday, and I'd do it once again. The fact that you are married only proves you're my best friend. But it's truly, truly a sin. Linger on your pale blue eyes. Linger on your pale blue eyes.
During a career lasting over 5 decades, Lou Reed transformed rock music. With his band, the Velvet Underground, he never achieved commercial success, but virtually invented the alternative rock scene. A solo artist, he never lost sight of his desire to disturb, shock, and thrill.
What goes on in your mind? I think that I am falling down.
Tonight, friends, colleagues, and fans remember him.
Work all right. Let it be good.
Guitarist Lenny Kaye, who became part of the Patti Smith Band, was one of the countless musicians inspired by the Velvet Underground during their now legendary summer-long residency at Max's Kansas City in 1970, shortly before Lou left.
Lou really had this romantic streak. He told me about a song by a group called Alicia and the Rockaways that was very close to him when he was growing up on Long Island. And over the next 3 years, I made it my point to search it out and find it for him. Lou loved pop music. That was what his root was, in a sense. He loved a beautiful, simple lyric, a heartfelt emotion. He could push the limits of what was possible within rock and roll, sexually and pharmacologically and sensually. But you could always feel his beating heart underneath that. His songs are so beautiful. You know, I'm Set Free and Pale Blue Eyes. I mean, these are songs that come from not something that wishes to confront, but something that wishes to heal. Lou could be very prismatic. He liked creating alter egos to reflect different sides of his personality. Lisa says, you know, Ginny says. And yet, they were all resolutely him.
Candy says,
Caroline says that I'm just a toy.
Lisa says, Stephanie says, when answering the phone.
Caroline says, as she gets up off the floor.
His solo career is really, it just keeps moving back and forth.
Let's great American well. Let's great American well.
And then you know, in the glorious late 80s and 90s when he started doing these beautiful song cycles about his environment and his past in New York.
Last great American well, Americans don't care for much of anything. Land and water the least. Animal life is low on the totem pole, and human life is not worth much more than infected yeast. Well, Americans don't care too much for beauty. They'll shit in a river and dump battery acid in a stream. They'll watch dead rats wash up on the beaches. Complain if they can't swim.
His meditation with John Cale on Drella, Andy Warhol, he's getting more reflective. You can feel his questing mind.
There's only one good thing about a small town. There's only one good use for a small town. There's only one good thing about a small town. You know that you want to get out when you're growing up in a small town. You know you'll grow down in a small town. There's only one good use for a small town. You hate it, and you know you'll have to leave.
I think Lou understood that as Lou Reed, he had a certain sense of power. But at the end of the day, you got to come home, close the door, and live with your creation, your Frankenstein creation. I'll be your mirror. Reflect what you are in case you don't know. You look at his work, and what you're seeing as the Lou Reed you're seeing is really yourself.
Writer Victor Bockris worked for Andy Warhol's Interview magazine in the early 70s and went on to write books on the Velvet Underground, William Burroughs, Warhol himself, and John Cale. His first Lou Reed biography, Transformer, was published in 1995.
I'll get back to you in a few minutes to let you know what else is going on.
He's a poet. He was inspired by poets. He comes out of poetry. He comes out of Baudelaire and Poe and all that, and Rimbaud, and he saw that rock and roll was a totally adolescent musical form at that time, and it was really written for adolescents, and it sold to adolescents, and so on. And he made a conscious decision. How about making rock and roll for adults, which is sort of like, you know, writing a more complex existentialist novel as opposed to an adventure story or something, right, for kids. And so therefore, when you write War and Peace or whatever, of course there are great ecstasies and there are great depths. He really studied very hard the short story form, Raymond Chandler particularly, and seeing how to translate that into song lyrics, where you tell a story in a song, even though it's fragmented, but it worked, you know. Because, I mean, Lou originally he wanted to be a writer. When he went to college, he was a writer. He was writing short stories and things in the college magazines and stuff. He actually published his own magazine. And when he had the electroshock treatments, he couldn't remember. He'd read something, he couldn't remember what he read. He'd open a book, he didn't know where he was, because, you know, it takes away your short-term memory just for a while, just for like a week or something. Plus, you have to remember his parents made him do this to cure him of homosexuality. Can you imagine your parent? And they took him there without telling him what was. They said, we're going to go to see a doctor. Okay, we go to come to the doctor, and they get there, and you're going to have shock treatments then and there. I mean, that's such an incredible betrayal. I think the betrayal of the parents, particularly the mother, was as shocking as the actual treatments themselves, you know, in terms of his whole psyche. Bob Quine told me, he said that all the time he hung out with Lou for a few years, one time he only saw Lou frightened once, and that was when they were walking up the street and they bumped into his parents. Lou particularly was into amphetamines. His mind is full of images from his life, from his experiences, from literature, and so on and so on. He's pouring them out. I don't think amphetamine or any drug shapes those images. These people were working very hard. These are very serious people doing something very serious. They weren't taking drugs just for fun. They were really taking it. We all took drugs to work. That was the whole idea of drugs originally. I think Lou had a wonderful, wonderful life. I think he loved all of it. I think he just, he lived life. When he said, my week beats your year, I think he's absolutely correct. I mean, he experienced things, and he really went into the depths of them and the heights of them. And that's why I think we should celebrate Lou Reed, because he was one of those great explorers who went out seeking, brought back the goods, kept giving us music. It's very thrilling music. It's enthralling music. It's music that changes your life. It's music that you keep in your heart. You don't forget. It becomes part of you. That's a great achievement, and that's why I love Lou Reed, and that's why I love his music.
Actor Mary Woronov was one of the Warhol crowd in the heyday of the Silver Factory. She first met Lou and the Velvet Underground there in 1966, when Andy was both their mentor and manager.
The factory was silver wallpaper, black floors, silver couch full of cum stains. It was very grim. The Velvets, first of all, they're dressed entirely in black. They're very strange looking. They seem to know what they're doing and completely never acknowledge any audience. They were using feedback. They were using this stuff that you couldn't call music.
C6 Sarah had a golden nose, hobnail boots, wrapped around her toes.
I heard later on that they were going to play at this happening. They called them happenings then. George started dancing, and I started dancing, and then other people sort of started to dance. But the music was so strange. Didn't have a beat or whatever. It had a strange beat. It had a strange, kind of echoey. It was just awesome. I never heard anything like it before.
Whiplash, girl child in the dark.
People were leaving in droves.
Comes in bells, your servant.
The Velvets did not care, did not stop playing.
Strike dear mistress and cure his heart.
They started playing heroin, and this guy runs up and throws his works down on the floor and starts to shoot up. Well, the cops came. It was awful. We were always having these major horror, stories. Nothing ever went right. I mean, heroin was New York's answer to LA's The Doors' This Is the End. That's how powerful it was. And it was the answer because they were all running around like hippies and we were in black and white. They liked free love, we liked S&M.
It's my wife and it's my life because a mana to my vein leads to a center in my head, and then I'm better off than dead.
Lou loved the transvestites. He loved the absurd humor. He loved the nightlife and the kinkiness of it. He just loved it. He was not interested in entertaining jack shit. He was interested in these bizarre things, like Venus and Furs or like, heroin. And so he wrote about what interested him. It was just really entertaining, and it was sexy, and it was hot. And, if you're high enough, I guess, you can spend the whole night flirting with it also. Lou used to he would go all night also, and then he would call a cab, and that would be that. And I would take the subway, back to Brooklyn Heights, because I was still living with my parents. So there was one night when Lou couldn't get a cab, and he had to come with me to my parents' house.
Early dawning, Sunday morning. It's just the wasted years so close behind.
I I put him on the couch, and then I went to my little room, and then I heard my mother say, you have to get up, you have to get up. And so I get up and I walk out, and there's my father at the breakfast table, and my mother's standing over the breakfast table, and there's Lou having conversation with him in his leather jacket, like this. I know. And I sat down, hi Mom, hi Dad, going to work yet, so Lou can get some more sleep. I don't know what to say to them. But it was stuff like that. It was just everybody sort of didn't plan anything or didn't have anything in mind. Things just happened.
I think the real difference, besides the kind of music we played, which is a very big difference, is we were there with Andy Warhol and all the attitudes that brought with it and all the talent and incredible creative force that went along with Warhol. The nice thing about being with Andy is it made me brave. Being mean to us or dismissing us didn't mean anything. No one ever heard of us to dismiss us, so they would go after Andy. When we were going to record, he pulled me aside. His advice to me said, everything's really great. Make sure you keep the dirty words in. That was it. He meant keep it rough. Don't let them turn it into this just this thing anyone else could do. Don't let them tame it down. Don't let them make it so it doesn't disturb anyone. Andy wanted to disturb people and shake it up, so did we.
You couldn't be too straight.
You got through, obviously, anyway. So.
Yeah. He had, I think, swastikas dyed on the side of his head, and he was fairly lean, if we could say. He was dramatically interesting. Well, I think if you grow up in a middle-class setting, as he did, and you don't embrace it, and he didn't, then, you can either head uptown or head downtown, and he headed downtown.
I'm waiting for my man. $26 in my hand.
Forgive me, but it's interesting on the wild side.
Up to Lexington, 125.
Everyone assumes it's just about depravity, but it's not. It's interesting. Lou was particularly verbal, the most intelligent, verbally speaking, person I'd met in rock and roll by miles. So I don't think he cared that other groups were more successful at all, actually. I think he knew that he knew how good he was. The most important thing about Lou is the writing. Lou's lyrics are really, really interesting to read, absent the music, and he's comparable to François Villon. I mean, he's as good as they get on the page.
This room costs $2,000 a month. You can believe it, baby, it's true. Somewhere there's a landlord laughing till he wets his pants. No one dreams of being a doctor or a lawyer or anything. They just dream of dealing on the boulevard. Give me, you're hungry, you're tired, you're poor, I'll piss on them. That's what the statue of bigotry says. Oh, you poor huddled masses, why don't we just go clubbing to death? Get it over with and dump them on the boulevard. Get it out. To the dirty boulevard, I'm going down. To the dirty boulevard, get it out. To the dirty boulevard, going down.
When he died, the first thing that passed through my mind and out my mouth was, he's as good as it gets. You don't get better than Lou as an artist. It doesn't. People don't get made better than that.
Lou's second album, Transformer, was released in 1972. It was a huge success, despite cataloguing the sexual shenanigans of Warhol's factory in the hit track Walk on the Wild Side, a hymn to Lou's fascination with the transvestite superstars Candy Darling, Jackie Curtis and Holly Woodlawn.
My friends called me up and said, "Oh, turn on the radio, because Lou Reed just wrote a song about you."
Holly came from Miami, FLA. Hitchhiked away across USA.
And then we went to a party, and he was there, and he was in the corner. He's a shy, quiet guy. So I asked him, "How do you know so much about me?" He said, "Holly, because you have a big mouth." Because all I said was, the truth. I plucked my eyebrows and shaved my legs, and became a she.
In the back room, she was everybody's darling.
He was surrounded by that because of the factory, the Warhol crowd, and all that. So I think he was just sort of, I don't want to say voyeuristic, but he just wrote songs about what he saw and knew. When Lou wrote Walk on the Wild Side, he made me immortal. So now, honey, whenever you drop a quarter in the jukebox, and there's Holly came from Miami, FLA.
One of the things people forget about the song is how compassionate they are. Irony, detachment is just a method of telling a story, after all. And it doesn't mean you're not sincere. I mean, the fact that you have distance and aren't frothing all over yourself about something doesn't mean you're not sincere, and doesn't mean the songs don't carry an emotional wallop. I think sometimes things carry more of an emotional wallop if when you tell it you're a bit detached. It'll catch people a bit off guard. They're not looking for that. And I also think that it makes things sound true. Because you're not trying to impress somebody. You're not trying to make them cry. You're not trying to make them sad. You're not trying to make them scared. You're telling them a story in a straightforward way.
Photographer Mick Rock first met Lou in London in 1971, when Lou hadn't sold any records, as either the Velvets or as a solo artist. They were introduced by one of Mick Rock's constant photographic subjects, David Bowie. That night, he took the pictures that were to fix Lou's image for years to come. The Transformer image.
Because I went backstage to meet him with David, took me back to say hello to him before the show, and he was in a corner on his own, and it was kind of dim. There was something slightly bat-like about him. So it did seem to confirm all of one's suspicions. Not exactly Nosferatu. It was very organic, the whole thing. It was no record label bungling in, trying to control anything, because Lou would have bitten them if they tried to do that. He actually took the best photographs of me taken in the 70s. I remember staying up with him for 2 or 3 days once, and at some point he said, "Give me the camera," and they're actually all, well, for the most part, they're in focus, He'd come over, he'd be on a tour, go and see the show, hang out with him a bit, and then just have a session. But they were very Simple Affairs, Lou was self-styled. I've got a lot of great pictures of him just laughing. I threatened to publish them to him at times. I said, I'm going to fuck with your image, Lou, you know that?
You do what you gotta do. You do what you can. You do what you wanna do. Oh, but I love you, Suzanne. You try anything once, try anything twice. You do what you wanna do. Oh, but I love you, Suzanne. I love you when you're good, honey. I love you when you're bad. You do what you wanna do. Oh, but I love you, Suzanne.
He wasn't really such a dark person as a human being. I mean, look at the beautiful love songs and how, in a way, how simple they are, lyrically, how direct. Like A Perfect Day. I mean, my mother loves that. She's 93. I mean, he could touch many, and of course, I'll Be Your Mirror, which he wrote, I think he wrote that while he was at college, is one of the most beautiful love songs ever written. Of course, what's curious about that is that he gave it to Nico to sing to him while they were having their love affair.
I find it hard to believe you don't know the beauty you are. But if you don't, let me be your eyes, a hand to your darkness, so you won't be afraid.
He wanted to plumb the depths and check it all out, and I understood that. So we went to visit this mate of his. He lived in an apartment that was absolute chaos. Lou said he was the best B&E guy in New York. You know, B&E is breaking and entering. I mean, you've got to remember how intelligent the guy was. This is a super intelligent, super cerebral, very informed guy. I mean, Lou was a born contrarian, you know.
Would you describe yourself as a decadent person?
No. How would you describe yourself?
Average. No?
I think so.
Okay.
People were just talking very superficially to him. He would bite them.
I thought I knew what I was saying, but if I listen to you much more, maybe I won't.
He was always very sweet with me, but I saw him torture a few journalists.
Tell me when the thing's running.
Sometimes he did it just for the sport, I think, you know. But once he got the reputation, he thought, okay, I'm going to live up to it.
Are you a transvestite or a homosexual?
Sometimes.
Which one?
No.
Okay.
I'm not going to sit here and do the lecture circuit.
My God. David, you should keep in mind, I got a BA in English. I graduated college. Okay. I'm aware of irony and distance. I come from a middle-class background. So I'm street with a BA. You know, it's like an interesting combination because it gave me the ability to phrase some of these things in something other than the vernacular of the street. So I wasn't just a one-trick pony. There were more sides to me than that.
The Transformer album was Lou's brief glam period. Produced by David Bowie and Mick Ronson, its fusion of sex, drugs, and glamorous androgyny became an inspiration to those who were anything but straight.
For me, the most important thing about Lou Reed was what he did musically, and I think, you know, if you're a kid and you want to be cool, there's two albums, you know, The Velvet Underground and Nico and Transformer. Those two records are so much a part of the kind of rock and roll rites of passage. You know, you can't really be considered credible or cool if you do not have those records. My first kind of experience of Lou Reed was Walk on the Wild Side, I think. That was the sort of real beginning of my love affair with Lou Reed, you know, because that song, I think, was, if you were a little gay kid in suburbia, that song, you know, had you walking on invisible heels. I mean, it was just so otherworldly. I mean, even more than sort of Bowie, because I think although Bowie was sexually ambiguous, Lou Reed delivered it with a kind of so what quality. It was almost like, who cares, you know? That's why I love the 70s, because the 70s, you know, a lot of stuff was kind of just made up, you know, Mick Jagger and Bowie in bed, Mark Bolan and Mickey Finn having an affair. It was all great stuff, but it probably wasn't true. But, you know, you don't really want stuff like that to be true. You just want it to be glorious gossip. I had to see him, and it was around the time of kind of Rock and Roll Animal and Sally Can't Dance, The Bleached Hair. And looking back, I think he was pretty wasted at that gig, but I didn't notice. I just thought, oh, he's fantastic. I discovered recently that Lou Reed wasn't very fond of Transformer, which is really shocking. He didn't like it and would never talk about it. So, you know, it's one of those weird things with sort of certain rock stars that they embrace a kind of sexual ambiguousness, but then when they sort of get sensible and marry, they want to disown it. Oh no, but that's just, I don't want to talk about the camp bit.
What is in her mind?
If I was going to describe Lou Reed, I'd say he was kind of always effortlessly cool, even as an older man.
Caroline says.
I don't really think of Lou Reed as kind of druggy, hard, brutal and savage. I think of things like Caroline Says, you know, or They're Taking Her Children Away.
You can hit me all you want to, but I don't love you anymore.
If you're a kind of quirky kid in 10 years' time, you probably will find Transformer. Might be in, you know, your dad's record collection or your grandfather's record collection, whatever. But I think if you've got an ear for music, you'll hear that and it will resonate with you. And I think that's the power of all great music.
The whole glam thing, like, was kind of great for me when I met Bowie and he was into that, and so I got into that. But all it was something that I had already seen with Warhol, but I hadn't done that then. So the 70s was like a chance for me to get in on it, and since no one knew me from Adam particularly, I could say I was anything, be any way. I mean, that was one of the great things you could, and I learned that from Andy. You could be anything.
Perversely, Lou followed the hugely commercial Transformer with a disturbing concept album, the tale of drug addiction, domestic violence and suicide that is Berlin, produced by Bob Ezrin in London and released in 1973.
In Berlin,
back home, Lou's personal life was crumbling,
by the wall,
and his appetite for narcotics was keener than ever.
you were 5 foot, 10 inches tall. It was very nice. Candlelight and Dubonnet on ice.
He was an amazing combination of being slightly awkward within his own skin and yet being completely consumed with and focused on a particular idea. And so you put the two of them together and what you get is this kind of nervous determination. I felt really connected to Lou, emotionally very sensitive to what he was going through. And so I tried to use his state of mind as an advantage, as a resource. And I tried to get him to see it as a resource. So he didn't come in and feel like, I'm not in the mood today, and I'm sorry, and I'm letting you down. He would come in and say, I'm not really in the mood today, and I'd say, no, you're not in the mood for that, but wow, what if we did this one? And he'd think about it, and he'd go, yeah, yeah, I can do that one.
How do you think it feels when you're speeding and lonely? Come here, baby. How do you think it feels when all you can say is if only?
You know, drugs were a big factor in what happened to all of us around the record. And at certain points during the day, it, I think, stalled what we were doing, but we'd quickly recover and then get back on track. But those musical moments, those things that happened in the performance, those were transcendent, clear-headed. They were above and beyond whatever substance we may have ingested 4 hours before. Do you know what I mean? I think on a certain level, I may have misjudged how London would affect Lou. People were surrounding him and pulling at him outside of the sessions. So there was a lot going on in his mind while we were making Berlin. When I delivered it to RCA, I said, you know, okay, Lou, and Lou's manager at the time, I said, okay, here we go. I got it. We're going to deliver it. And they said, okay, let's go. And we delivered it. And I looked around and they were gone. They'd left the building. The aftermath of Berlin for Lou, it was fairly devastating. It wasn't just a matter of the press writing crushing reviews about it. And they got really personal. I mean, they were very nasty and sort of direct. But it wasn't even that. I think the whole experience of living in that dark place, you know, that, I mean, really, it's a place of the dissembling of a human being ending up in suicide. So you can't get darker than that. The days were short and nights were long and it was raining and it was just sort of, it was a overall fairly depressive experience while being artistically uplifting. He said he couldn't stand to listen to it. He locked it in the closet and didn't want to see it again for years, which is actually the truth. He didn't listen to it again for years. I, on the other hand, came off of it having, you know, had my first experiences with certain drugs and was just feeling like hell. In 1972, Berlin was one of the darkest experiences of our lives. In 2006, it was positively uplifting. It was the most energetic, spiritual, beautiful experience live on a stage that I'd ever had, and I think that Lou had ever had.
They're taking her children away because of the things she did in the streets, in the alleys, and the bars. She couldn't be beat, that miserable, rotten slut. She couldn't turn anyone away.
Berlin was used in a lawsuit against me by management to show that I shouldn't be allowed to do projects on my own with people of my own choosing, because if I did, this is the kind of album I would put out. Can you imagine this? It's a nightmare come true. I'm in court having this baby that I loved. Ezra and I killed ourselves over this album. We thought it was gonna be like a cinematic experience, except on record, with strings, this real grandeur, and there it is being used in court against me in a lawsuit where they were really trying to hurt me, make no mistake.
Guitarist Steve Hunter played on the original Berlin recordings and became part of Lou's band for the subsequent Rock and Roll Animal Tour. They were reunited in 2006 when Lou played Berlin live for the first time.
I wasn't a fan until I heard Walk on the Wild Side. I couldn't believe he got away with saying some of the stuff he got away with on that. And it was in top 40 radio, we heard that. And I thought, now that's a true rebel. That's a guy who's pulling it off. There were all these other people who thought they were rebels, but this guy's getting away with it. Even when she was given head, that's on the radio? I couldn't believe it. I was completely shocked. And I was secretly, I was saying, yeah, Lou, you know, that's way to go, man. I'm glad you got away with that. I think that's very cool. There was a side of Manhattan in those days that was just under the surface. It wasn't way down. It was just under the surface. So when I would go to the studio, you'd get out on a summer's day at 10 o'clock at night, and there would be people starting to sort of coagulate around the area, you know. Okay, what's going on? Is it a parade or something? You know, and I come back out about 2 or 3 in the morning, and it's all hookers and drug dealers and all kinds of stuff going on out there. And here I am, this little skinny guy with a couple of guitars. I thought I was going to get killed. Anytime you can meet a composer or even just a poet who doesn't mind stripping away and looking at the ugly side and making you see the ugly side is maybe not so ugly. It's like driving by an accident, you have to look. And I think Lou made you look. When I heard some of the lyrics of Berlin, I was completely blown away that he was talking about a side of drugs and drug usage that just people who were doing drugs didn't want to hear about. Well, no, I don't want to hear the ugly stuff of drugs. I want to hear how cool it is.
The rich son waits for his father to die. The poor just drink and cry. And me, I just don't care at all.
I never would have wanted to get into a fight with him, ever, because I don't care how big somehow I just get the feeling he would tear things off of me that I don't want torn off, you know? Lou was a street New York guy and a survivor. So whatever it took him to survive, he could do that. Lou reminds me a lot of Edgar Allan Poe. I read The Pit and the Pendulum and was just, I could not believe somebody could write a story like that in 8 pages or however long it is, that had me scared to death, just reading the words. But then Poe would turn around and do Annabel Lee, do this incredibly romantic, beautiful poem to a cousin or something. He was just as weird and quirky and looked at the dark side of life like Lou. They both were able to be dark and romantic at the same time.
On Avenue B, someone cruised him one night. He took him in an alley and then he pulled a knife. And he thought of his father as he cut his windpipe and finally danced to the rock minuet.
I think New York lost its best reporter because he was so observant, so keen, so gentle and hard at the same time, and it was always so heartfelt. I don't know if you've ever heard a song called Rock and Roll Minuet, but that song, you can't listen to that song and not feel something.
Paralyzed by hatred and a piss-ugly soul. If he murdered his father, he thought he'd become whole. While listening at night to an old radio where they danced to the rock minuet.
passion for sonic terrorism and the avant-garde inspired Thurston Moore and the music of Sonic Youth. Moore treasures L0U's double album, Metal Machine Music, released in 1974. Despite being comprised of nothing but feedback and guitar effects, L0U toured it in 2010.
I figured like nobody would really talk about Metal Machine Music and like how significant that record was. And to me that record was completely fantastic. I mean, there was no such thing as a noise record, and that was the first noise record I ever heard, and it was by Lou Reed, who was supposed to be doing Sally Can't Dance Part 2, and it certainly wasn't that.
Sally can't dance no more. Now Sally can't dance no more. She can't get herself off the floor. Sally, she can't dance no more.
Sing along with Lou Reed on his new album, Sally Can't Dance, on RCA Records and Tape.
I just figured like it was going to sound like the way it looked, you know, which is like this total like badass kind of like glitter rock Lou Reed on the cover with his leather jacket, and that cover was just beautiful. And then those liner notes were just so striking and kind of just like, you know, my week beats your year. He ends those liner notes. I mean, it was like what a thing to say. And then the review of Metal Machine Music, it just had the word no written on it like 100 times. You know, I was talking to somebody from Rolling Stone recently about Metal Machine Music, and the journalist was like, well, you know, nobody's ever listened to that record all the way through. And I was like, oh, well, I have numerous times. Like, I still do. I actually had it on quad. I had a quadraphonic version. I had it on quad 8-track tape. I have all variants of Metal Machine Music. It's one of the most important records in my life.
It was inevitable that sooner or later L0U should bump into novelist Paul Auster, another writer dedicated, in his own way, to the dramas, dropouts and dangerous delights of a New York City that by now, in the 1990s, was fast disappearing.
Life's like me and a soda, and life's like space without room, and life's like bacon and ice cream. That's what life's like without you.
I remember there was a moment when, the time when we were closest and were seeing each other fairly often, he told me that he wanted to write a novel. He had figured out a plot. He wanted to write a crime novel. And I said, well, good luck, Lou. And a few months later, he said, you know, it's damn hard. I can't do it. I don't have the ability to make a big story. So I think his form was the short lyric, and he did it brilliantly. His songs are the words. I mean, L0U was not a singer. I mean, he was able to present these songs in a brilliant way, but it's the combination of the personality coming through the voice. I remember a very amusing song. I think it was a song really about Laurie Anderson and their love for each other, and the song had to do with all her ex-lovers and he wants to throw them off the roof of her loft and see them run over by cars on Canal Street. I thought this was hilarious and so vivid, because some of his songs are very funny, too. They're not all grim. We worked on 2 films together. The first one is called Blue in the Face, and L0U has a prominent role in the film. He is Lou Reed, the resident philosopher of the Brooklyn Cigar Company, sitting behind the counter. And I was the one off camera throwing questions at him.
I'm scared in my own apartment. I'm scared 24 hours a day, but not necessarily in New York. I actually feel pretty comfortable in New York. I get scared like in Sweden.
Each one of his comments is hilarious.
You know, it's kind of empty. They're all drunk. Everything works.
Acerbic, strange, unpredictable.
You go to the medicine cabinet and open it up, and there'll be a little poster saying, in case of suicide, call. You turn on the TV, there's an ear operation. These things scare me. New York, no.
I really think, in a way, he steals the movie. He's the heart of the movie, and he's not doing anything. He's just sitting there and talking.
My childhood was so unpleasant that I absolutely don't remember anything, I think, before age 31.
I don't follow, the world of pop music that closely. But I can tell you that I look out at the scene, what I know of it, and I don't see anyone like him. There's no one doing what he did. And so, in a sense, he's irreplaceable. And that's why I think we're going to keep needing him in the future. And I think his stuff is going to go on being listened to for a long, long time.
1, 2, 3. If you close the door, I'd never have to see the day again.
In 1993, the original Velvet Underground reformed. Their music was as unrepentant as ever, driven once more by their proto-punk drummer, Maureen Tucker. If L0U had resented the lack of recognition for the band first time around, now was the time to remind everyone just how influential they had been.
We're looking forward very much to playing for people who've always said, I wish I could have seen a Velvet Underground show. Well, now you can, with the original four members in great shape, up and barking.
Our reunion tour was like a dream come true. That was really, really exciting for me to be playing with them again. It really, really was. L0U's changing in those 30 years almost. I would say the major thing, or the only thing really, I guess, that I noticed is that in 1993, he was a big deal. And in 1968, he wasn't. We had a sound check one night for 6 hours. And that was being pretty damn picky about how your guitar sounds. The first time I saw L0U play in a long, long time, it was, I don't know, 1986 or 7 or something, in Atlanta. And it was the first time I had seen him play to a big audience, and I cried. I truly did. I was not hysterically, but tears coming down. I was so excited for him. I always had a special, not a concern, I don't want to say, I was always worried about L0U. I don't mean that, but later on, after the Velvets, I would often really worry about him. I don't want to sound like more than it was.
Some kinds of love, margarita total, between thought and expression, lies a lifetime. Some kinds of love, possibilities and and for me to miss one would seem to be groundless, la la de ta ta ta.
My friend L0U, I miss knowing he's out there, knowing he's happy and playing music and is out there in the world. When the people who made up your life, especially your young life, die, and I don't mean just your friends or your relatives, but the people who made up your world, the actors who were big at the time, the musicians, the politicians, when they start dying, that's scary. It starts getting kind of scary. But when it's someone you've just loved for so long, and he's always been out there doing his thing, and you just know he's out there in the world. That was very difficult. That was really, and still is, I'm still feeling really weird about it.
But you have to understand what a nice, sweet guy he must have been, because he married Laurie Anderson. And that was it. That was a love affair. That was the love of his life. It's hard to believe he's gone. I mean, it just... And thank God he had Laurie with him to, you know, make it go gently. Yeah, I cried. I cried. He was a gladiator, and he, you know, he was an amazing artist. He was an exceptional human being by any standards.
I carry Lou Reed with me in a way, like I carry my family. And losing him was surprisingly one of the biggest blows of my life. Lou voiced those things that his entire generation was feeling, and generations after too. But when he said, "My life was saved by rock and roll," he was talking for me.
The only thing I'd like to add is I'm going to miss that guy. You know, he was always good for a nice hug. The guy I got to know riding a motorcycle through the wilds of Pennsylvania, you know, and he's in front and I'm on the back, and we're both kind of, we're hardly Hell's Angels. And he's like waggling his bike, you know, like that, and, you know, then we scoot along, and it was just kind of a normal day. In a weird way, I have to think, yeah, it was a perfect day, and I'm glad I spent it with Lou.
When he was sick, before he died, I went to see him in Southampton in the hospital. And he reached up and we held hands, and I kissed him, and he was crying, and it was just awful, awful. I miss everything he was. Funny, brilliant, gifted. There won't be another one like him.
You're going to reap just what you sow.